West on the decline, vice replacing virtue. As most of you have probably noticed, we on the West are sliding down a path of degeneracy and decadence, and with every new modern disagreement to the old traditionalism, we slide faster. This age of decadence hasn't been brought upon us by accident, not fully, but on purpose on behalf of those who have something to gain out of this mess. Who is it then, and why? When we shifted from monarchies to democracies, we shifted a lot more than just a title. Now the false assumption of how everyone is seemingly in control just because you have a vote to cast has led us to a situation where even questioning the morality of democracy has people giving you the bad eye, because democracy as a term has been emptied of its meaning. I mean, if you ask an average person on the street to tell you the costs and benefits of a democratic system, I bet you're not going to get very far. Democracy as a term has been emptied of its meanings, and the term itself is pounded to our heads since we are born. No wonder we take it for granted, huh? What was the one biggest thing that changed when we switched from monarchies being the normal to democracy? Intention and interest. You see, back in the age of monarchs, the monarch in power actually owned the state and wasn't just working for it. So, if the state made more money, the monarch did as well. So there was absolutely no competing interests between the state and the ruler, unlike today, where our politicians only work for the state for a certain amount of time, and they own absolutely no part of the system, so their only actual interest is to raise their own salaries, and not the national ones. They are in to make money for themselves, not to serve the people in it, because if they don't own the system, they won't be the ones to pay back the debts they've brought upon the nation. It's their children and their children's children who'll pay back, and not the politician. In monarchy, the people in power weren't elected and voted to power, they were usually the direct offspring of the monarch in power, or a person chosen specifically by the monarch. This rule of inheritance made sure that the monarch ceases to make absolutely terrible decisions for his people, because after all, if he managed to fuck up the nation's economy, it would be his heir to pay it back. So, in essence, people in power had to care about their nations like parents care about their children, caring for their everyday needs, and also securing the best possible future for them. Nowadays, things are very different. Politicians aren't forced to think very far ahead, so they are allowed to make decisions that seem satisfactory of benefit in the here and now, but will be the worst considering the long-term effects. In the age of monarchs, the benefits of having a low time preference was incentivized, and now, at the age of democracy, it's the destructive high time preference that has raised its ugly head. It has been measured that high time preference is one of the qualities that people with the highest IQs possess, so in essence, this switch from monarchies to democracies has also incentivized bringing low IQ people into the world of politics. This isn't good. In my opinion, politics aren't a thing that everyone should take part of. It's only the best and wisest of us that we want out there determining the fates of our nations, and if you disagree, well, I don't know what to tell you. Best man for the job is the best man for the job. One other thing about the difference between a monarchy and a democratic system. In the age of monarchs, wars were avoided like a plague. Wars weren't considered a national duty, they weren't a thing to be proud of, and you know why this is? At that time, people saw wars very differently than we now do. Wars were considered to be the king's personal battles, and every man lost in that war was one good man less to forward the system the king had carefully built. So not only was there no real hurry to go and kill your neighboring countries, there was absolutely no money in it. In fact, at some point in time, people weren't always even sure if a war was going on between their country and another. That's how distant it was from the average Joe. There was no killing of the civilians. There was no mandatory service in the army. The whole of the king's army was formed of volunteering men by default, or at least that was the norm back then, and so, if the king decided to actually go so far as to lead his men into battle, his first and foremost mission wasn't necessarily to kill the other team, it was to keep his own men safe, to make sure they come back home after the battle, because every killed member of the monarch's society was a good man forming the good world they tried to build. The king had to fund the war, so he never gained money, he just lost it by fighting, unlike today, where wars are absolutely the one biggest source of income for the big nations like the US. While I don't necessarily long for the age of monarchies to return, I can't help but think that before the arrival of democracy as a norm, a lot of things very different, and better. Now, having said all this, I believe that this switch is where the trouble started for the West. This is where we started leaving behind the glory of traditionalism, and traded, piece by piece, to hedonism, material goods, and momentary pleasure. There are many things that have given way to this new toxic way of life that has been rushed into our minds since we were little kids, and they aren't forced upon us all at once, but little by little, so that we don't suspect anything. We just keep swallowing whatever the money-hungry politicians keep feeding us, because we're all living under the assumption that politicians at power are all there to actually serve the people, and not themselves. This is clearly not happening, but I've noticed that the idea of it alone makes people smile and go back to sleep. You parade for your favorite politician to be on the hand of power, and when he gets in, you think you've saved the world. They'll see what a good person you are, just give him a little time, and nothing ever happens. Sure, there are good things done by modern politicians as well, but the norm of political discourse has done a drastic shift from healthy debate between people who care about the world to rivalries who are willing to do anything and everything to silence their opposition. Just like kids arguing on Facebook, it's useless shouting and shaming of the opponent to make themselves seem more powerful, because that's what politicians crave, because that's what the state is. In essence, power over people. What things have contributed to the decline of the West? Why are these kids going away from traditionalism, and towards hedonism? You only have to take a glimpse at the modern college culture, and you'll know. Drink every weekend, drink till you black out. Have unprotected sex with a different person every week, or if it was up to you, every day. Boys sit at home playing video games and smoking weed, avoiding every chance to take responsibility of anything, and girls drink every night, and embrace the idea of being a slut, because apparently, behaving promiscuously and jumping on every dick they can find makes them empowered. This is a thing that I advise you to read on, if you haven't. The effects of this behavior are real and drastic, and these poor people won't see it coming, until it's time to stop being an asshole and put their lives together, you know, until it's time to become an adult. For example, this is from an article published in psychologytoday.com. For both men and women, taking into account prior psychological disorders, the odds of developing substance dependence increased virtually linearly with the number of sex partners. The relationship was particularly pronounced, however, for women. This hedonistic behavior has been proven to cause inability to have real emotional fulfillment, with both men and women. This lack of fulfillment in life correlates to anxiety and depression, but also, substance abuse to self-medicate their way onto happiness. It has also been concluded that the younger a girl starts to have sex, the more sexual partners she will have over time, and so, the younger you start to fuck around, it becomes more and more likely for you to suffer from depression, anxiety, and addiction. These things correlate to both men and women, but the most effects they have on young girls in particular. Let's keep going. No matter what your personal opinion about gay people is, the LGBT+ movement as a whole has affected the Western world in ways that aren't only bad, but degrading. I have no problem with gay people as people, I don't care who people love or have sex with really, but marketing this sexually deviant behavior as something that's even better than being straight is just nuts and wrong. This is true with gays, but especially on the whole transgender question. I don't hate these people, I have absolutely no ill will towards them, but if they try and make it a law, that I must call them whatever they want to, or choose to be, that's when the problems start. See, scientifically speaking, being transgender isn't a real thing. Think about it what you will, but the most recent studies have shown us, time and time again, that it's simply not possible to be born to the wrong body, it's simply not. You either are a man or a woman, ask any chromosome. I don't think these people should be discriminated against or hated, but I really wish that their delusional thoughts were taken seriously and that their mental illnesses were treated properly, because while most of the kids who say they're trans grow out of it by the age of 16, some of them won't, and that means they're suffering from severe gender dysphoria, which should be treated as the mental illness it is, not celebrated on the streets by men walking around on bondage gear in front of kids and waving dildos to your face, as they usually do at these degenerate gay pride events. If gays really wanted to be seen as just normal people and as someone who is ought to be taken seriously, they'd be the first ones fighting against these monsters that are making all of them look bad in the eyes of the average Joe by dry humping each other in front of little children at these stupid marches. It's disgusting. Let me be clear, once more, it's not the gays that disgust me, it's the culture that surrounds them. It's the way that the loud minority of them parade around making them all look like some actors from a bad 80s porn film. So, that's another thing we ought to tolerate in today's world. Here's the thing. While I don't have a problem with these things in particular, I have a big problem with how they affect the world around me, and how they make the world go worse and worse by every single one these things they throw at our faces. They throw in things that are horrible and disgusting at first, but after a while, we tolerate it, and after some more time, it's just a normal part of our world, and then, boom, another thing to tolerate, and the rat race goes on. Fight back against every degenerate act you witness, because while not the act itself, it's the intention behind the act that's making our world go downhill faster than a transgender changes preferred pronouns. These acts of degeneracy, partying all day and night, having sex all around, these things have given birth to this new thing that's affecting all of the world right now, a massive wave of laziness and entitlement. Right now, we live in a culture that's just a metaphor for mere human rights. It's a culture of do nothing, get everything. It's the feeling that just by existing, the society as a whole owes you something, the sense that you have worth without contributing anything to the world around you. In traditionalist view, you have to really work towards a goal and earn everything you have. The traditionalist view aligns with this libertarian notion of earned private property. If you haven't worked for it, it's not your property, and having the state to redistribute your hard labor by force is theft. Remember what we talked about in the previous post about democracy. The state doesn't have any money, the state is a tool to redistribute people's wealth from one person to another by force and violence. But that's just my inner libertarian speaking. In the modern world, we're replacing our old glorious ideals of heroism and liberty with comfort and luxury. We're literally on the brink of extinction but too comfortable to do anything about that. We ought to accept everything that people throw at us. They're taking down every dissident voice, because every dissident voice within a nation costs the state money, and you know what makes money? Failure and vice on an individual level. The state has the ability to use power and violence, and essentially, the power to expand, every time you sit on your ass and decide to do nothing all while receiving government handouts. Acceptance towards everything leads to acceptance towards laziness and vice, and this is visible from the first grade to nursery homes. Kids are being taught to accept failure, to take comfort in participation, rather than to strive for ideals and glory, and this is essentially what is bringing down the Western world. Remember, laziness gives way to superior, more tribal cultures, and this is visible in every Muslim-ridden country. Their culture of tribalism and tradition is what unites them, our modern culture of individualism and comfort is what separates us, and eventually, will destroy us. As my president, Saul Niinisto said, we're not exporting our own ideals, we're struggling to conceive our own. Do your part, strive for glory, reject the global, and embrace the local. Forever yours. Finish Infidel.